Hello again. We have just looked at persecution and martyrdom in the New Testament, largely through the first century of the early church. And next we want to look at the second century, during a time when persecution largely was instigated by the empire. We see the emperors instigating us sporadically edicts and laws opposed to Christians. All right, so we're going to begin our discussion with correspondence between Pliny the Younger and the Emperor Trajan. So let's talk about these two important figures in Roman history as well as in Christian history. Pliny the Younger, you see his life dates there. He was the nephew of Pliny the Elder, who was well known for writing natural history, and he died in the aftermath of Vesuvius. But the younger Pliny was a Roman governor in Bithynia, which is located in northern Turkey. You can see Bithynia mentioned in 1 Peter 1:1, and also the Council of Nicaea took place in this territory. He wrote a panegyric, that is to say, a very complimentary biography on the Emperor Trajan, who was his hero and sponsor. And Pliny also published 10 books of letters, and it is his letters to and from the Emperor Trajan that concern us today. All right, the Emperor Trajan, you see his the dates of his reign, 98 to 117. Well, here's an image of Trajan. He's the one on the right. All right, this is actually a statue of Trajan at the Tower of London. Trajan's reputation was proverbial. It was said of later emperors, may he be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan, because Trajan was very good and well respected. He built a number of public works and made the last major territorial conquest by a Roman emperor. Despite these civic successes, however, his policy regarding to Christians led to their persecution during the second century and into the third. All right, so let's look at Pliny's inquiry, his letter written to Trajan, written around 110 AD, so just after the turn of the second century. He spoke in his letter that he was conducting trials against Christians. Simply to be a Christian was a capital offense, and if a Christian was arrested and discovered to be a Roman citizen, then that person was transferred to Rome for a trial. Now, we are not certain as to the laws written against Christians at this time. Perhaps edicts issued by Nero in his persecution, or more likely, edicts written by Domitian against those who refused to worship the emperor, and of course Christians would be included in that legal injunction. All right, but simply to have the name Christian, simply to be a Christian, was a criminal offense during this time. Now, it's interesting that Pliny himself did not know what offenses by the Christians were so terrible as to be worthy of condemnation. Now, he recognized that Christians were stubborn. He called Christianity a depraved and excessive superstition, all right, because they refused to worship the emperor, because they refused to accept other religions, idols, and gods. He recognized that they were stubborn, but nonetheless, they did not seem to exhibit any crimes. Um, there was an anonymous document that had been published with the names of supposed Christians, and when he interviewed them, some of those who were accused denied being Christians. They performed libations to the emperor and to the gods and were released. Others maintained their faith in Christ. They were given 3 chances to deny Christ and then were executed. Pliny went on to interrogate Christians and those who were former believers. During his investigation, he actually tortured 2 women described in Latin as ministri, 2 ministers. Perhaps these were deaconesses. Perhaps this is evidence of women holding the office of deaconess during this time. Or they simply could have been servers in the church. But through these interrogations, he learned about the Christian faith and practice. All right, so this is what Pliny learned about the Christians' faith and practice at the turn of the 2nd century. 1, they meet on a fixed day before dawn. All right, most likely this was the day of the Lord or Sunday. During their worship, they would sing responsively a hymn unto Christ as to a God. All right, so Pliny understood that the Christians believed that Jesus Christ was God. Now, this is important to us because contemporary skeptics like Dan Brown, author of Da Vinci Code, Bart Ehrman, and others, they claim that early Christians really did not ascribe divinity to Jesus until later centuries. But this is false, and they know it. But they try to convince unknowing readers and listeners that early Christians just felt that Jesus was a wise teacher or a great prophet. But no, even Pliny the Younger knew that Christians believed that Jesus was divine, and they did so in the early 2nd century. Now, not only do Christians not commit crimes, they take an oath not to commit crimes. And so there are no crimes that are ascribed to Christians, and they partake of ordinary and innocent food, probably a reference to the Lord's Supper. This is what Pliny learned about Christians during his investigation, and it seemed evident to him that they were not particularly criminal in their activities. They simply were a stubborn, superstitious faith. Now, during this time of his inquiry, temples had been deserted. Now they were being frequented again. Nonetheless, Christianity was spreading among all ranks, ages, and genders, from the cities to the rural areas. So we're seeing that the church was growing and expanding, was bringing many new converts into the faith. And so, in the face of the growth of the church, Pliny consulted Emperor Trajan. And this was how he replied. We have a copy of his letter to Pliny, and he commended Pliny for following proper procedures. He said that if Christians are denounced and proven guilty, they must be punished. Now, if those who are accused deny being a Christian, if they worship the Roman gods, they shall be pardoned. Now, Trajan did say that anonymous accusations were not acceptable. All right, in other words, an anonymous accuser could not denounce someone without evidence. All right, so anonymous accusations are not the Roman way, as Trajan said. Now, Trajan's policy of denouncing and imprisoning, punishing, and even executing Christians was enacted into law into the 3rd century. All right, so this was an official imperial policy against Christians for the 2nd century and even into the 3rd. Now, Tertullian, writing around 200, had this to say about Trajan's policy. O miserable deliverance! Under the necessities of the case, it is a self-contradiction. It forbids Christians to be sought after as if they are innocent, but it commands them to be punished as if they were guilty. This policy is at once merciful and cruel. It passes by, but it also punishes. Why do you play a game of evasion upon yourself, O judgment? If you condemn, why do you not also inquire? If you do not inquire, why do you not also absolve? And so Tertullian, wise Christian teacher of Carthage around 200, was very critical and even sarcastic in his response to Trajan's policy. There are a number of significant, inspiring stories of persecution and martyrdom in the early church that I simply do not have time to relate to you in this lecture. I want to very badly, but I'm just not going to take the time. You can read about these in your textbook, and you have some extra readings that will tell you about some of these. So I will let you read about them. They are just listed here. Ignatius, the Bishop of Antioch, was arrested around the time of the correspondence between Pliny and Trajan, around 110. Arrested, he may have been betrayed. He may have volunteered for arrest as a Christian, but he was transported to Rome for execution, and along the way he wrote 7 letters, 5 letters to churches in Asia, plus a letter to one bishop, Polycarp, about whom we'll speak in just a minute, but another letter to the church in Rome. And in the letter to Rome, he begged them not to seek his release. You will read this letter in your assigned readings for this unit. But he did arrive in Rome, and according to very trustworthy evidence, was executed by being thrown to lions in the Colosseum. And you see an illustration of the Colosseum in Rome with a cross there that was erected to commemorate the many martyrs who died in Rome, all right, including Bishop Ignatius of Antioch. All right, I mentioned that one of Ignatius's letters was addressed to Polycarp, who is Bishop of Smyrna. And his martyrdom took place in the middle of the 2nd century, around 156. He was arrested because there was a pagan festival going on at the arena in Smyrna, and the pagans who were worshiping their false gods decided that the best way to show their worship was to bring Christians into the arena to be executed in honor of the gods. And after several Christians were executed either by the beasts or by other means, they cried out to bring Polycarp, whom they called the destroyer of the gods, because he had converted so many away from idolatry to Christianity. So Polycarp was brought before the magistrate, who begged him to renounce Christianity because of his great age. He didn't want to execute such an elderly man. But Polycarp said, 86 years have I served my king, and he has been faithful to me. Why would I fail him now? And so Polycarp was burned at the stake. All right, it was in the next decade after that Justin was martyred in Rome. Justin had been born and raised in Samaria, over in Israel. He had sought truth in a variety of philosophies, but in Ephesus he was introduced to the Christian philosophy, and he was converted, so convinced in the truth of Christianity that he traveled to Rome to open a Christian philosophical school. He got crosswise with one of the advisors to the emperor Marcus Aurelius, and so Marcus Aurelius had Justin arrested, and he was beheaded in the Colosseum along with several of his companions. For some reason, Justin was singled out by the early church to be given the surname martyr, and so we remember him as Justin Martyr. All right, in the next decade, around 177, similar to the experience in Smyrna, in Lyon, in what was then Gaul, is now France, there was a public gathering of worship for the false gods of the region and of the time, and they called for Christians to be arrested and tortured and killed. 36 died in a 6-day period in Lyon. So these are, as you can expect, very moving, powerful stories, and I hope that you will read about them or even read them when given an opportunity. Now, I need to emphasize that persecution was not constant during this time, nor was it universally inflicted throughout the empire. It was sporadic. It was interspersed with periods of peace, and some governors would enforce laws against Christianity, or atheism as it was considered, but others would not. All right, I'm going to move to North Africa. The church there is often called the Church of the Martyrs because of the zeal of Christians there and because of the extensive persecution that took place in that region. Now, the African church probably was founded by Jews returning from Pentecost to Egypt and Cyrene. We read about this already in Acts chapter 2. And so from Cyrene in Libya, from Alexandria, Egypt, there would be interaction with Carthage and Scythium, North Africa to the west, or perhaps Christians from Rome would have commerce with Carthage, and the gospel could have been carried from that direction as well. We really do not know the origin of the North African church, but the very first document in Latin about Christians was the Acts of the Skeleton Martyrs. written about 180. As I said, the first record of Christianity in Africa, the first example of Latin Christian writing, and the first reference to a Latin Bible. There were 12 African Christians that were martyred for their faith in 180. You see the names listed there, 7 men and 5 women. The Acts that are left to us are actually a trial record, and there's several interesting features there, but I will only mention in passing that every accused Christian was interviewed, and the common response from each one was, "I am a Christian." So this was the common confession of Christians when they were brought before trial. We'll see this again as we read the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas. All right, this story is one of my very favorite. It was the subject of my dissertation, and so we will spend a good little bit of time talking about the Passion. There were 3 authors of the Passion. I'm sure you are familiar with Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, and so you understand that the word passion can mean more than simply emotion or attraction. It comes from a word meaning suffering, and that's the meaning here. It's the suffering of Perpetua and Felicitas. And so the Passion is a document that tells the story of the persecution and martyrdom of Perpetua, Felicitas, and their companions. 3 authors were involved. One was Perpetua. Her diary is embedded in the Passion. It is the earliest document known to be written by a Christian woman, therefore quite precious to us. There's also a beatific vision recorded by Satyrus, who was the teacher of the group. This vision echoes John's vision of heaven in Revelation 4 and 5. These 2 documents, written by the prisoners themselves, were given over to an unknown editor who preserved the writings of Perpetua and Satyrus, added an introduction, and then an eyewitness account of the deaths of these martyrs. Let me give you the background of the Passion. The emperor at the time was Septimius Severus. He reigned from 193 to 211. He was born in 145 in present-day Libya, North Africa, so he was born and raised in the area in which the Passion took place. He rose through the ranks of the military to become the emperor in Rome in 193. Now, following the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180, the empire entered into an era of decline. You may remember that I said that the Pax Romana, that period of Roman peace, ended in 180. And so Severus is ruling during a time when he sees the empire declining. And so he wanted to return to traditional Roman values, all right? But for him, those values were the old-time Roman religion. And so he issued an edict that prohibited the conversion from the worship of the Roman gods to any other religion, such as Christianity. So this edict was this edict of persecution was aimed mainly at new converts and their teachers. It was observed mostly in North Africa, Severus's region of origin. All right, we see also there were uh, martyrs in Alexandria, Egypt. Origen's father Leonidas, who had been the teacher of new converts, was arrested and executed. And then here in Carthage was the other place where we see this edict enacted by the regional governors. Here's a map of the Roman Empire, and you see uh, North Africa, and over in the west we have Carthage, the home of Tertullian. Tertullian was a contemporary of Perpetua, and he even mentions her in one of his treatises, the one on the soul. So I just want to give you a geographic location for Carthage, the site of the Passion. All right, the martyrs of the Passion, certainly we would focus on Perpetua. She was a young noblewoman, newly married, and a mother of an infant son who was still nursing at the time. Now, there's no mention of her husband in the Passion. And so we suspect that her husband abandoned her at her profession of faith, wanting to separate himself from a follower of an illegal religion. Now, Perpetua was educated in Latin and Greek, and during her prison experience, she kept a diary of her visions and her experiences in prison. She had a number of visions. They were fantastic and very imaginative, symbolic, full of images that are very revealing about her expectations, her theology, and how she believed herself to relate to Jesus during her experience as a Christian. Felicitas was her slave, who was 8 months pregnant at the time of the arrest. And Felicitas and her companions were concerned about her pregnancy because Roman law prohibited the execution of a pregnant woman. And so they probably would have held her back, and the others would have been executed, but she would have been executed later with common criminals. They all wanted her to join them in the experience of martyrdom, and so they gathered around her and prayed that she would deliver her baby early, and indeed she did. She delivered her baby. It was a girl, and she had to give up her daughter to a sister in Christ. In the same way, Perpetua had to give up her son to her father. And so both of these women renounced their earthly family relationships in order to cling to their Christian family, and then also to take their place as the brides of Christ. Now, there were 3 other new converts, men named Saturninus, Revocatus, and Secundulus. Secundulus died in prison. We do not know why. We do know that he was beheaded by a sword, but he did not die with the others who were condemned and sentenced to die in the arena in Carthage. They would fight the beasts for the entertainment of the crowds and in the honor of the emperor's son Geta on the occasion of his birthday. And the last martyr was Satyrus, who was the teacher of these new converts. He was not arrested at the time that the others were, and so he surrendered himself to the authorities. He desired to continue their training, to support them and encourage them during their imprisonment, and he was willing to die with them. All right, you see here a picture of me back in 2007 when I was, my goodness, much slimmer in those days. But I had the tremendous opportunity, so grateful for the chance that I had to travel to Tunisia, North Africa, to visit the very site of the martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicitas and their comrades. And I participated in a documentary telling the story of Perpetua and the others. This was a documentary that was a bonus feature for a torchlighter animated story of Perpetua, a hero of the faith. There's a whole series of torchlighter videos, but this is for a documentary that was embedded in the DVD for the purpose of giving background to the story. All right, this documentary is available to you on YouTube and is part of your reading assignment. And so you can go to YouTube, do a search for Perpetua, early church martyr. The URL code is listed there, but really all you need to do is to go to YouTube and enter the search. It's about an hour long, but it's well worth it. And so I'm going to pause the lecture, actually end this lecture right now, and let you spend the next hour of your time watching this documentary. It'll be well worth it. It will teach you not only about this particular experience of martyrdom, but it is in general very indicative of martyrdoms during the early church. So I pray that you'll be blessed and inspired by this story.